COVID came, and now they're gonna rent out 2 floors of buildings.
Amount to 1% of the budget.
Almost nothing.
I'm using
And I wonder if it's even worth it.
That's right, because I actually wanted to spend my
Yes. Actually, I can't 48 hours before. I used to go and stuff. But it shouldn't be that bad.
No, we should say
Was your, babe, what was your interaction? Did you pick cameras? And you had, like, you had a sheet. Where is she? I didn't have.
The operation itself is
Yes, you did.
nothing.
I think
It's over
so.
real fast.
She had one too, right?
Huh?
She had one too.
Yeah.
I can't wait till I have mine. Because I'm so excited about not taking classes for distance anymore, possibly.
I think your well, I think your PowerPoint is just behind here, so.
Okay.
Just have to, okay, I'm gonna do the introduction here. And
Okay.
I'm gonna ask class to say something too. Obviously.
Dan, is there a clicker or something?
Is there a clicker? Yeah, I think this will work, yeah. That one I think works, yeah. So once we get rid of this, yeah, okay. Yeah, just bring this down a little bit more. Oh, maybe it's at the top, isn't it? Okay, that's fine, yeah. Yeah,
That's what.
right, so, all right, so we'll roll. Come on in, Greg, have a seat. Glad you showed, good to see you. So welcome everyone to the final School of Architecture and Planning lecture or lecture series. I hope you've seen some of the lectures we've had thus far. We've had some nice ones. I think nearly all are on our SA+P YouTube channel, and I think we are broadcasting, we are streaming live. Are we streaming live, guys? Yeah, okay, great, okay. We do this series every spring, and we've had a really good series this semester. And I just wanted to call your attention before we have this final lecture for 2 upcoming events. Both are about the Chesapeake and about the Baltimore waterfront. The first is an event sponsored by AIA Baltimore and their Urban Design Committee about the future of the Inner Harbor, and specifically Harbor Place, the Harbor Place Pavilions, and I'm sure everyone in this room has read something about Harbor Place or heard something. There's going to be a very large meeting. And Klaus, do you want to say just a word or two about that event? So we have Klaus Philipson, one of the organizers of that event.
Yeah, there's the Urban Design Committee of AIA, and they are putting this up together with ASLA. And the purpose of the event is not to talk about the design that is currently proposed, but to go behind this and, like any good planning student would do it, to how did we get there, what's the history, what are the objectives, the criteria, and precedents and the like. And we have 5 panelists of different expert areas that will speak about this. And then there will be a public Q&A. It will be at the Renaissance Hotel on May 8 at 6 p.m.
Right, so that's May 8 at the Renaissance Hotel, and I think there's a registration link on the Baltimore AIA website. Now, what you don't see on the Baltimore AIA website, even though it will be at the AIA offices, its headquarters downtown on Charles Street in the Charles Center, is an all-day event called Estuary Urbanism. It's Friday, May 10th from 9 to 6:30. So again, that's Estuary Urbanism, 9 to 6:30 on Friday, May 10th. And that is sponsored by the School of Architecture and Planning, working with Baltimore AIA with funding from Morgan State University's Academic Affairs Office. And that one will take a deeper look at the long history of the Chesapeake, including its geology and archaeology, and talk about climate change impacts, talk about port operations, which are very much in the news these days, and what has to happen in the next 20 or 30 years for us to have a Chesapeake that we use, that we appreciate, that we enjoy, that foster diverse wildlife and allow for the city of Baltimore to have its kind of raison d'etre. Okay, so that's Friday, May 10th. We don't have a link on the website yet. I think we will, hopefully by tomorrow morning. But if you need more information, you can always email me. All right, so today we can maybe, wait. All right, see if we can go to slideshow.
Down at the bottom.
Okay, now it's in. Okay, great. So today we have a really interesting lecture planned. And I think it'll be on a subject that will be familiar to any observer of Baltimore urban development over the last 10 or 20 years. There are a lot of implications, a lot of parallel paths between what's happened in Philadelphia and what's been happening in Baltimore. And the person that's going to lead this tour of this subject is none other than Laura Wolf-Powers, who stands on my right. Dr. Wolf-Powers is a professor of urban policy and planning at the City University of New York, Hunter College, where she teaches economic development, real estate development, and community planning. Her book, University City, History, Race, and Community in the Era of the Innovation District, was published in 2022 by University of Pennsylvania Press. Her current research focuses on the political economy of land valuation and property taxation. And I have a copy of the book here, University City, and I think we're going to hear a lot about this now, right?
That is the subject of my talk.
Yes, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for being here. I know it's the end of the semester. I really appreciate being invited to give this talk, and thank you very much to Dan, who is an alum of our master's program at Hunter, and Dan gave a lecture on his new book at Hunter a couple of weeks ago, so it's great to be on his home territory. I'm going to be talking, as Dan said, about my 2022 book, which considers the case of University City in West Philadelphia. So you all probably know Philadelphia pretty well, but this is the city of Philadelphia, and those of you who have taken history of urban planning classes probably heard a great deal about this. The William Penn's in 1682 plan for Center City, Philadelphia, 2 miles wide, 1 mile north to south, and that stretches in between the Delaware and the Schuylkill rivers. And right on the other side of the Schuylkill River, across from Center City, is a neighborhood which is now known as University City. It wasn't always known as that. That's a relatively new name for the neighborhood. It started being used in the 1960s under circumstances that I will describe. This within University City, I'm focused on this territory in particular. Early parts of the book deal with University of Pennsylvania's redevelopment plans in the 1950s and 60s. The Penn campus is down here, but the areas that the book is mostly dealing with are north of Market Street and are kind of more in Drexel University territory. And recently, during the 2010s, there were 2 innovation districts that were launched in this area. One of them is called U City Square, and it's kind of a expansion of the University City Science Center, which was created in the late 1960s. The other one is called Schuylkill Yards, and it's right next to 30th Street Station. Eventually, their plan is to kind of deck over the Amtrak and SEPTA rail yards there and build a lot more office buildings. For now, it's quite impressive, even on its own, plan for housing, offices, laboratory facilities, and so on. So there are these two projects. They're both kind of advertised as innovation districts. And so in the book, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to unpack the economic logic underlying the innovation district, which is a policy that academic institutions across the United States are pursuing in partnership with the municipal governments and development companies. I'm also going to talk about the history of West Philadelphia redevelopment politics that kind of forms the core narrative of the book, concentrating on the racialized conflicts over property ownership and political citizenship that come up repeatedly over the course of the 6 decades that I write about. I'm also going to talk about Drexel's adaptation of the innovation district policy model in the 2010s. And finally, I'm going to talk about the way that stakeholders in this contemporary redevelopment scenario conceived of and mobilized the concept of community as they advocated for outcomes that they desired. So that's, there were many people using the word community, talking about the concept of community. Some of those were people in the universities. Some of them were people representing neighborhood organizations. This talk is really about Philadelphia, but it's worth noting that all over the United States, Baltimore, St. Louis, Detroit, Sacramento, academic institutions are pursuing these kinds of partnerships adjacent to their campuses, investment that promises to bring widespread urban economic prosperity by way of commercializing knowledge that is generated in the university domain. So I'll just start with a few things about innovation, the kind of economic theory behind innovation districts. Since Joseph Schumpeter named innovation as the crucial source of capitalist economic dynamism, the question of how to create the conditions for innovation have been kind of a preoccupation for academics and policymakers alike. Researchers have extensively studied the spatial concentration of innovative activity, establishing that enterprises that succeed in commercializing basic science tend to cluster in geographies where different combinations of factors are present, like human capital, dynamic supplier-purchaser relationships, and social environments where entrepreneurs inform and inspire one another. Scholars have combined Schumpeter's work with that of the economist Alfred Marshall, who used the term industrial district to describe places where ideas and know-how spill over to firms and related industries. So here you see an article by Ann Markuson that describes late 20th century industrial districts, which have been adapted as innovation districts. Recent scholarship places research universities at the center of these dynamics. So these scholars are proposing the metaphor of a triple helix to characterize the intertwined roles of universities, firms, and government in promoting innovation-led growth in particular places. And my colleague Sharon Zukin at CUNY Graduate Center also uses the triple helix framework in her work on New York City and its innovation complex, which she argues emerged in the aftermath of the 2008 recession. But as a number of scholars have pointed out, the urbanity of high-tech development is a relatively new phenomenon. Science-led economic development from the post-World War II decades to the beginning of the 21st century tended to happen overwhelmingly in suburbs and exurbs. So urban research complexes like the University City Science Center in Philadelphia, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, were exceptional, and they were only modestly successful. The most celebrated innovation clusters thrived along freeways, like in places like Silicon Valley, in office parks that were designed to be self-contained and distant from the urban fray. Much of the academic research on spatially concentrated innovation in the US is focused not on cities, but on metropolitan regions. In contrast, proponents of the 21st century innovation district embrace the urban core. Bruce Katz and Jennifer Wagner of the Brookings Institution herald a remarkable shift by which innovative firms and talented workers are choosing to congregate in compact, amenity-rich enclaves in the cores of central cities, unquote. Instead of self-contained lab and office-dominated research complexes, people are talking about present-day development in proximity to university campus that includes housing, retail, hotels, public spaces, in addition to offices and labs. So this 2015 Philadelphia Magazine article drew attention to the walkable streets, the retail, and the central public square that was going to be part of this innovation district. And what attracts investors, and it's very crucial to know that the contemporary innovation district depends on partnerships with property investors, and what attracts them to the innovation district model is the promise of economic return on non-commercial development on university land, these so-called live, work, play environments that I'm sure you've heard mentioned. Innovation district scholars originally conceived the triple helix metaphor to describe the process by which academic researchers collaborate with industry entrepreneurs to transform government-funded basic science into saleable inventions, whether those are pharmaceutical compounds or computer technologies. And ultimately, the idea was that there would be profitable industrial companies. But in this model, and it's kind of important to make this distinction, university real estate departments are collaborating with property entrepreneurs to develop new urban spaces with the expectation that they will become destination for technology intensive firms and skilled labor. So the idea is that these innovation districts are collision points for innovative people, there's definitely a view of the sort of thriving businesses as being the end goal, but property investment is really the means to that end. It's a real estate investment that's the means to that end. So just moving into some recent history, live, work, play environments and the role of private development partners were on Drexel University's mind in 2012 when it introduced a new campus plan and strategic plan. The plan, with its statement that the officials intended to create a 21st century district marked by the area of University City, marked by livability, amenity, and accessibility, was clear about its intention to enlarge the area of University City that Drexel students, employees, and visitors would identify with the university at the western edge of its existing campus. But the University City Square district, the U City Square district, was set to be located in an area with a very tormented political history. It was an area where a Black neighborhood containing 1,407 homes had been bulldozed in the late 1960s to make way for the University City Science Center and a new public high school. It was an area that had been the epicenter of protest and conflict in the past. So in my research, I was motivated to sort of center the present perspective of residents of nearby neighborhoods in the redevelopment of these sites, because essentially the new innovation districts were being built in the very same location where this neighborhood, Black Bottom, had been demolished about 50 years prior. So the first, these are the fathers of the University City Science Center in 1969 or 1970. So the first chapter of my book tells the story of the West Philadelphia Corporation, which is a consortium of academic institutions in West Philadelphia. They formed in 1958, and they formed in a milieu where academic administrators, particularly at the University of Pennsylvania, had already been concerned that crime and poverty at their borders represented a threat. They were interested in doing what they could to create physical and conceptual distance between town and gown. So so Urban Renewal was the tool that they used, and there was when the Housing Act was renewed in 1959, there was a provision that allowed municipalities to count funding supplied by academic institutions toward the local match required to unleash federal funding, and that ended up having a big impact because there were a lot of universities got involved in redevelopment and in using federal urban renewal funds to redevelop the areas around their campus. So from there, I'm just going backwards. So from there, it was not too far to a plan seen here in a statement to draw on federal renewal authority and money to engage in neighborhood redevelopment adjacent to universities. Excuse me. Redevelopment at the time meant slum clearance, the demolition of neighborhoods that they considered blighted and corrosive. And so you see the reference to blight here. Conditions in the West Philadelphia area that the document was talking about, it was known as Greenville or the Black Bottom, exemplified a racial and spatial transformation that was taking place in the urban north at that time, the urban industrial north. The area had undergone significant growth in Black population in the 1940s and 50s. There was the in-migration of Black households from the rural South and elsewhere in Philadelphia, and the out-migration of white households to newly constructed and racially exclusionary working-class housing in the suburbs. The poor environmental conditions of the Black Bottom emanated from the persistence of a real estate color line that crowded Black households into restricted areas, forced them to pay above market rent for substandard housing, and excluded them from the mortgage market, and repeatedly subjected them to displacement at the hands of redevelopment efforts. So here you see the perspective of one of my interviewees. And then this is the document establishing West Philadelphia Corporation again. So the fact is that the practices that had helped to produce the dilapidated buildings and desperate tenants that the West Philadelphia Corporation is decrying here, that they didn't really recognize that. Rather than identifying the economic distress that they observed in the Black Bottom as a symptom of injustice in the social order, university and city officials accepted and perpetuated a narrative that conflated substandard conditions with the residents of these areas themselves, and that then justified efforts to expunge people from the area. So the part of Unit 3, Urban Renewal Area Unit 3, that university officials were most concerned about was the 26 acres that they cleared for the development of the University City Science Center and the University City High School between 1966 and 1969. As I noted earlier, prior to the demolition, this area contained 1,400 homes, and 264 of them, or 18%, were actually owner-occupied homes, which is a relatively unusual thing at the time in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. In the book, I also elaborate the efforts of an organized group, a citizens committee, to prevent wholesale destruction of their neighborhood. The Citizens Committee was especially incensed by the cooperation of the Philadelphia School District in the plan to build a new high school facility at 36 and Filbert Streets, where many of the owner-occupied properties were concentrated. People wrote letters like this one from homeowner Fanny Robinson to Pennsylvania Senator Abraham Ribicoff. They protested at City Hall. They litigated. They joined with University of Pennsylvania students to occupy the president's office. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was involved. The Congress on Racial Equality was involved. The NAACP was involved, but none of it worked, and the area was cleared. So I talked to people when I was doing this research who remembered living in this neighborhood and visiting this neighborhood, and who remembered the struggle to prevent it from being demolished, and also remembered the trauma that the uprooting of the neighborhood caused. But I also read accounts of professional planners who were inclined to justify the sacrifices and losses inflicted on this community in the name of some greater good. The tendency of policymakers to valorize what they consider to be broadly beneficial economic development above the concerns, interests, and commitments of disfavored households of color is a theme that connects the urban renewal culture of the mid-20th century with the innovation district efforts of today. As I will argue, there are many differences in many ways in which current redevelopment practices improve on the past, but there are also many common threads. So with that, I turn to the present and to the policy model that Drexel has adopted in University City over the past decade. I wanted to start this section by kind of positioning myself within the story. I taught in the School of Design at UPenn from 2008 to 2014, and one of the classes I taught was a course called Introduction to Community and Economic Development. I ended up organizing that course around an area of about three quarters of a mile from Penn's campus called the Lower Lancaster Corridor. And the first assignment asked students to describe a walk westward from 34th Street here near 30th Street Station up to 45th Street along Lancaster Avenue. And so this is there actually is still a streetcar that goes along this stretch of avenue. It is very commercially, there's a lot of churn and commercial distress on the avenue. One of the projects the students did was a commercial corridor analysis. There's some interesting late 19th, early 20th century housing, but there's also a lot of vacant land, as you can see. And at this time, Drexel was really beginning to kind of unveil its plans to build a lot of new office and lab and office and residential and retail here under this the dynamic new president, John Fry. And this was being experienced. So on the one hand, you sort of have this very, kind of disinvested area where there were high poverty rates and high crime rates. On the other hand, you had interest in this area because of the promise of new development, interest in this area and building student housing. Developers began to acquire vacant lots or dilapidated row homes and replace them with housing oriented towards students. The Obama administration's designation of a federal promise zone in the neighborhoods along the corridor in 2014 was also interesting. Because here you had two planned innovation districts. So these are all the different zones, and there was a Keystone Opportunity Zone, which is a Pennsylvania sort of tax privilege zone. You had the Federal Opportunity Zone. You had the Promise Zone. You had the University City District, which was a kind of a special services district that universities had financed. So you had these two planned innovation districts that University Square, City Square was going to be here, and Schuylkill Yards was going to be here, that were, these were both inside the Federal Promise Zone, and the state of Pennsylvania Keystone Opportunity Zone that entitled firms that located there to a variety of city and state tax abatements. So you had this kind of proliferation of official zones and districts coexisting with a set of unofficial, very much perceived but not formally declared borders and boundaries that divided safe neighborhoods from unsafe neighborhoods, divided the campus or identified territory with the not campus identified territory. So this kind of leads us to ask, what does Drexel's innovation district policy look like exactly? It has a couple of different elements. The first is community engagement and social inclusion. When John Fry of Drexel stood with the CEO of the Brandywine Real Estate Investment Trust to announce the Schuylkill Yards Innovation Neighborhood in March 2016, he proclaimed this 20-year, $33.5 billion project will benefit thousands of low-income families without disrupting the fabric of their neighborhoods. Schuylkill Yards will connect long-term economic development with sustainable social progress on a level that's never been done before. And just a few weeks later, Fry's executive vice president pledged that the university's educational extension programs housed at the Dornsife Center, which you see here, would help ensure that social mobility for residents of struggling neighborhoods would be baked into the university's development strategy. Drexel's Office of University and Community Partnerships provided numerous services and technical assistance to civic groups and not-for-profit service providers, and collaborated with these groups on applications for government grants. Underneath these optimistic statements, however, lay a complex reality. While Drexel's Office of Community and University Partnerships had one mandate, its Department of Real Estate and Facilities had another. The part of the university that managed relationships with third-party development partners responded to a different set of incentives and imperatives than the part of the institution that dealt with the neighborhood representatives. And these imperatives had less to do with social inclusion or preventing displacement, and more to do with ensuring that Drexel's development partners and their investors would see an adequate return on investment. which is how you saw public assets like University City High School, which had been built in 1970, on land that had been cleared from this neighborhood, replaced by new structures owned by Drexel and its development partners. So this was the community that was envisioned by the developers of the innovation districts, communities of ingenuity filled with talented knowledge workers, living, working, playing, generating tax dollars. And it's important to note that nobody was directly displaced for this new development. It was primarily done on vacant land. So, and direct displacement for urban redevelopment purposes is really frowned upon now in the planning profession. And planners are very contrite about the extent to which it happened on their watch in previous decades. Nonetheless, displacement effects were and are observable in the communities adjacent to the innovation district development. So over the course of the 2010s, rents rose dramatically in the two census tracts that comprise the nearby neighborhood of Mantua, Philadelphia census tracts 108 and 109. Those who own their homes saw property taxes skyrocket, and loss of property through foreclosure was common. And to avoid this fate, many people were selling their homes for cash to real estate companies whose interest was primarily in the land. So the cover of the book is actually from an art project that some people at Temple University organized in 2014, which was called Funeral for a Home. And it dramatized the loss that occurs when buildings to which residents have symbolic attachments are worthless from the point of view of real estate economics, like less valuable than the underlying land by itself. So Funeral for a Home was a day-long event structured around a ceremony commemorating the demise of this building here. You see the flower garland at 3711 Mellon Street in Mantua. There was a minister performed a service, and there was a gospel choir, and the procession to the junkyard to deposit remains, and an outdoor lunch, which is what you see in the photo on the cover of the book. The issue then was that while Drexel's Office of University Partnerships was investing in children and adults in the Promise Zone, its real estate partnerships were driving up the price of land and housing, and that was making it difficult for economically insecure households to remain in the area. So this is a classic paradox of economic reinvestment. It's very common. It's happening virtually everywhere that universities are partnering with developers on innovation districts. It's not at all unique to West Philadelphia. The challenge of it was recognized in a neighborhood plan that was released in 2013 by a group of leaders who would soon formally incorporate into a group called the Mantua Civic Association. And this was one of I spent about 18 months going to monthly meetings of this civic association. One of the chapters of the book sort of describes their aspirations for their neighborhood in the context of all this redevelopment, which they were very much aware was happening, and trying to understand kind of how they could persist as a community in the midst of all this reinvestment that was taking place. And that represented an opportunity to them at the same time that it represented a threat. University City's experience is relevant to any city where large-scale publicly subsidized investment is exerting an influence on property values in nearby neighborhoods. And it's particularly relevant in cities where eds and meds are significant elements of the revitalization formula. The literature on eds and meds, which are often called anchor institutions, demonstrates the ways in which they boost wealth in their immediate neighborhoods while supporting municipal and regional economies. It also documents the benefits they generate in disadvantaged neighborhoods near their campuses through various partnerships with students and faculty, and community-based organizations. And yet, at the end of the day, the real estate development people always seem to hold more cards than the university community partnerships people. And so the recommendations that I make in my book are geared toward interventions that remove at least some land and housing from the speculative marketplace in this context, in order that people of more moderate means can continue to live in these improving neighborhoods where amenities like public space, access to healthy food, and high-performing schools are going to be intensifying in the next few years. And so these are some kind of immediate recommendations that I make. And then I have some broader recommendations First is that we expand our definition of investment to cover investment that is non-financial in nature. Investment of time, investment of care, investment of social capital. The idea is that the economic development officials often focus on dollars of capital pledged and square feet to be constructed and leased. But, the activists that I spoke to in these neighborhoods really conceived of investment in ways that it wasn't possible to denominate in dollars or property values, and planners should honor this. The second has to do with how planners and economic development policymakers think about innovation. Reliance on real estate return as the animating force behind innovation-led economic development confines planners to belief that only by attracting new residents and employees to these newly constructed neighborhoods can cities generate vibrancy and prosperity. And this is what newly constructed knowledge worker housing looks like in West Philadelphia. The economic success of this innovation district is being measured by the arrival of people who are renting apartments in places like this one. But my contention is that people with worthwhile ideas that are living in older neighborhoods too. And while it's true that they're not paying $2,500 a month in rent, that doesn't disqualify them from being innovators. A third recommendation is about history. We have a responsibility to recognize the ways that past policy, housing and labor market discrimination, the real estate code line has prevented households of color from accumulating material wealth and social capital. So even now when we talk about equitable development and social inclusion in a very commonplace way, community advocates are still operating in a milieu where political discourse reinforces the belief that low educational attainment, economic vulnerability, and encounters with the criminal justice system primarily stem from people's own limitations, their own poor choices, or their own pathology. So policy measures like the ones that I'm recommending are considered sort of unrealistic or unwarranted. So the point being that we haven't reckoned sort of with history, and we're still sort of blaming a lot of the symptoms of poverty on people who are poor themselves. Also, if we were to undertake some of these courses of action, we might avoid some situations that have arisen since this book went to press. This is they're right here outside of the Innovation District area, but very close to it, was a subsidized housing project called University City Townhomes, which was its contract, the owner's contract with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to provide below market housing on this land recently expired, and they decided to evict the tenants and sell the land for $100 million. Or that's the asking price. And so there was recently, since the research that I did for the book, there's recently been a great deal of activism around the plight of the individuals who were being evicted from the townhomes, and who actually, ironically enough, would have had the opportunity to live near some of these new amenities that the investment was providing, but unfortunately they did not. They did manage to negotiate for some financial compensation with the city of Philadelphia, but they've had to disperse and live elsewhere in other neighborhoods where the schools are not going to be as high quality, and where the opportunities to be near sort of amenities and jobs and things are going to be much less. So that is. That is my talk, and I would love to answer any questions or entertain any comments that people have. Thank you.
Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment or comparison? Kamash?
Yeah, maybe I'm not. I don't know much about urban planning, but are there any I'm guessing just from my very basic knowledge that most of the cases that we see are something related to this, urban area displaced by these developments. Are there cases where there are good examples of where there is,
where there's been reinvestment and people have been able to continue. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the policies that I recommended, like, having publicly owned land, like, reserved for deeply affordable housing, and, some kind of policies that prevent people's property taxes from suddenly skyrocketing, policies that protect people who are paying lower rents. All those kinds of things can be helpful in a situation like this, and there are definitely places where those are kind of more part of the sort of general fabric of municipal policy than elsewhere. I guess I'm thinking of some places in California. There was recently an innovation district project in Sacramento where residents negotiated a big community benefits agreement that ensured that there were some funds that flowed to community-based organizations to support people's efforts to stay in their homes. The city of Philadelphia is really doing, in a lot of ways, in their own mind anyway, the best that they can, just in the sense that they're a city with a constant fiscal crisis, and there's a sense that any kind of investment that comes in really has to be nurtured, and sort of whatever has to be sort of sacrificed in the process is kind of well worth that new investment. The sort of paradoxical thing about it, I think, is that a lot of times the new investment is tax privileged, so they're not getting that much new revenue from it anyway. And I think so in terms of better cases, I think there are places where awareness has been raised about those kinds of paradoxes. I'm thinking of Sacramento here. There actually is a community benefits agreement in place for one of the innovation district developments in Philadelphia. So kind of grassroots organizing and activism can help to kind of draw resources to organizations that are dedicated to helping incumbent residents. But overall, the dynamics are really very much about kind of, we have to get this investment in here, and whoever, if a few people have to lose their homes, then that's just kind of part of the process.
Klaus?
Yeah, so early on, you kind of juxtaposed the position that the planners had back then, that the individual sacrifice was necessary for the greater good, with a more contemporary view where the individual fate is more important, but that kind of takes an economic view versus a sort of more moral view. And then in your recommendations, you are, I think, rightly saying that the definitions that are used for innovation and for economic benefit are too narrowly defined. And I want to just expand a bit on that, because that I think is key. Before we go to the moral question and the ethical question, it is really important to say, is this serving the greater good of the community? And I have experience with EBDI in Baltimore, which is sort of the exactly parallel case. And we initially as an advocate for the community and then as a consultant, and the end result is similar to what you see here, which is a very narrow definition of what is innovation and what is community benefit in terms of taxes. And so the broader view would say I hear activists saying you can't win a game if a third or half of your players are not even in the game. And so an important piece is social capital, and to involve those folks that are on the ground, because they are representing social capital that is lost when you displace them. And that is a loss for the entire community. But the other is once you continue to drive apart the beneficiaries of these policies and the others that are basically further disadvantaged, then you are not having a healthy community. And that is the really bigger view, I think, of what a community benefit is to overcome these divisions instead of furthering them. I just wonder whether you want to comment on that.
Give her a lot.
Well, no, I mean, it's great to hear about your experience with EBDI. I don't know too much about it, but I think that I'm curious as a consultant, kind of what kinds of things you recommended and whether what you felt had traction, because I think in some ways it really is a kind of rhetorical or discursive battle in addition to being sort of a battle of policy. This idea that kind of investment means capital dollars and square feet constructed and so forth. I mean, I know we're architects here, so we like construction of new spaces, but then sort of the question of like, what, is, where does value exist and how do we preserve value that exists, even as we add new investment and new kinds of value. So I don't really have anything, to add to what you said, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your experience in East Baltimore.
Well, we started with assisting the local council person to develop guiding principles that were inclusion and all the right things. And we developed these principles, and then supposedly, EBDI they were not named that yet then. They subscribed to that, but in reality they lied. And then the very first thing that they did in the first phase is demolish every single home that was there. Mm-hmm. So this vestige of bad blood that came from a broken promise is continuing, even though they improved a lot afterwards. That is continuing to poisoning the relationship that Hopkins has out there. When I was a consultant, the very narrow track on which we tried to materialize real inclusion was that, as an architect, I identified with our team on behalf of EBDI homeowners that wanted to stay, but that had problems renovating their homes and keeping them up. And they then, after a lot of negotiation, received the same benefits as the relocation benefits that those got that were displaced. Mm-hmm. And with those monies, we designed for them the improvements in the homes, and with them the plans, and exactly like how they wanted it. And then they got hotel money for the time when they couldn't stay in the home, which was relatively short. So, but that was such a small drop in the bucket. And it was also based on architecture, so we tried to maintain certain streetscapes and street facades, and where there was continuity and there was a good row of row homes. That's where we tried to identify the most homeowners. But anyway, that was one effective strategy to keep homeowners in place, but that was like 25 participants or so. That was not
right.
Big.
Well, but I mean, it is something, and I think the fact that this was these projects were not did not directly displace anyone, is something. I mean, there's indirect displacement that's occurring, and what's interesting, and I didn't get to talk about it in here, but it's in the book, is sort of there were enough people who had in their minds the memory of the organizing that had taken place during the 1960s, that in the 2010s there was a real upsurge of participation and sort of envisioning what people wanted to see how they wanted to see their neighborhood change. You sort of saw that with the quote from the community plan. And so in a way, the experience of the sort of trauma of having seen all this displacement 50 years ago it was still kind of in the DNA of the neighborhood organizations, and they were able to make some demand. I'm not saying that it's great or that many of them have been, have been able to benefit or stay, but there is, an increased recognition of the fact that these are stakeholders, the people, the neighborhoods adjacent, even though they're not like university affiliated necessarily, that they're like stakeholders in the area as a whole, and they really need to be listened to and have resources directed at them. It's just, just kind of interesting because the university, they didn't even participate in the community benefits negotiation. They just sort of let the community groups and the developer, have that negotiation themselves. And the city also was kind of sitting along to the sidelines. So it's hard because you have these actors, you have like very powerful property developers and financial actors, and then you have a city which with its own fiscal interests like at heart, and then you have the university that kind of has a plan for what they want to do, and it can just be I was disappointed to see that the city didn't kind of the city was not in a position to kind of support the community-based organizations in their effort to gain from the redevelopment. But I do think that this is, I'm not saying this is, just like urban renewal. I'm saying that some things have changed, some things have stayed the same, and that we can, with strong community-based organizations that are kind of aware and well organized, and that have, partly because of these community benefits deals that have been reached, they have resources and support so they can continue to kind of vocalize the interests of incumbent residents in these areas.
I have a question. So, thank you for the very, I think, relevant and interesting lecture, and I'm struck throughout the book about it. That the verbiage, the rhetoric doesn't change, right? You talked at the end about a historical kind of approach to development, and I think that's absolutely right. I think it's also interesting thinking about EBDI is like here we are at Morgan State University, and Morgan State is expanding its campus, right? And I don't know exactly where it is, but the university is working with the city to acquire or have a long-term lease on the Clifton Park High School, which is like a mile and a half from here, not very far. And much like the University City High School, it was finished in 1971. So it's of the same era. And probably if we rolled back the history, if we looked at the history, we would find a lot of the same optimistic verbiage about what that high school was going to do and so on. The high school closed within the last decade, right? Again, under maybe similar circumstances. There's less development pressure there, but certainly the school district of Baltimore is reacting to the same kind of larger demographic shifts and outmigration. So Morgan State is going to take that parcel over, which kind of sits actually in the footprint of what would be the park, Clifton Park. And I think the plan is going to be to kind of clear it and do some kind of new university development on it. And I'm struck also about this, the way you characterize that planning should shift from a kind of mitigative strategy to a reparative strategy. And I'm thinking, is there lessons there for this high school that we're going to take down? Are there a couple of things that you would say or caution us, being very minor stakeholders to that particular action? Or if I had an ear to the president of the university, like, what should I tell him about this, about how to proceed?
You're good at the hard questions. I mean, I think, definitely, sort of, I think there's been, a lot of good scholarship, actually sort of about sort of the way that Baltimore's landscape and built environment in Baltimore have been kind of inflected or infused with, kind of racism and kind of stigmatization of land that is associated with communities of color. And so I think to kind of look at that carefully, or kind of look at the way that public education has been kind of denigrated as a public good and to take, to kind of make sure to do like a deep dive into the history of Clifton Park High School and, under what circumstances it was developed and how things sort of evolved, to the point where they decided to close it. I think that it's helpful to build on that. Anything you're going to do new, it's helpful to kind of have a complete awareness of what went before. Just to kind of, as a way of not fooling yourself into thinking that what you're doing is, kind of on a tabula rasa. So I think that's one thing. And I think that, as an HBCU, Morgan State actually has the ability to make investments that engage high school graduates from Baltimore City, and that's a little bit different from the situation that I'm describing. And so, and I think there's been some new attention to the potential of HBCUs to be kind of social equalizers and to make, to kind of do some reparative work. And so, I would say like really lean into that, and as much as possible, try to position whatever is the new development is not something that like we're going to get these knowledge workers and geniuses, to build, to do this innovation work, but more like we're going to cultivate the innovators that we have here that we haven't recognized, we haven't necessarily recognized as much.
Then can I add something to this?
Sure.
I mean, when you go back to Clifton Park and this high school, there is really the question, why is the high school in the park? The park is a public space, and what I missed in your literary references was Lefebvre's, who owns the city or the right to the city. And that's really the fundamental question behind all of this: who controls the spaces? And so the public space is really the people's space. So they put the high school in because that was the easiest thing to do, they did that all over the city. They put the schools in the parks, even in the urban squares, and they ruined a lot of those urban squares that way. And so when you were to go from a planning perspective, you would just make this a park again, take this high school out. And when you think about it from, the high school was at least still a public use. When you put the university in, it's once removed from just the regular public use. And so I think these are other aspects to that are relevant, but not that you can undo the deal probably, but
Well, President Wilson and the university is very interested in innovation. So this kind of Lefebvre countercurrent, maybe you're the one who needs to get in his ear. You can, because I think you make a good point, right? And that may be lost, that particular bit of history might be lost in how that space gets redeveloped,
And a community benefits agreement is, of course, the the basic answer to if you have such a deal and the real estate people get something, then at least the community gets something back that they control. And so there's a monetary flow, and that could be used to improve the park edges and,
You could do what she's recommending by going to purchase the vacant lots or develop the city-owned lots for permanently affordable housing, for additional amenities to the additional services, amenities.
You're saying the university might take the lead in doing that?
No, but there's a lot of vacant, there's a lot of vacant land
Or it should
around
be a
Clifton Park.
CDC, like,
Yeah.
Coppin,
Yeah,
Coppin University, they created a Coppin CDC
yeah,
that did somewhat a strategy on how to do just that. And, around Patterson Park in Baltimore, there was a private CDC that did that very effectively to lobby the city to fix the park, and then they fixed the edges. And today, this is a very thriving neighborhood. It's somewhat gentrified, but it is very successful. And that is what, market could do in this case to fix the edges.
I just want to note that there was Morgan's, we did this planning students, we had a studio last year where we did this. Where we looked at Morgan's Clifton Park campus.
Oh,
and what conclusion did you come to,
Well,
guiding principle?
A few
for-
things that I just thinking about it. One was that because it is so stuck. Like, I'm more worried. My concern is not so much that it's going to gentrify these neighborhoods. My concern is that because of like Claude said, it's really kind of stuck in the park. It's not particularly accessible to the surrounding neighborhoods. Is that it's not going to have any effect. One suggestion from a student that we included was basically to take over, to kind of move because basically you need to have some development that's going to connect to the street. And I was thinking a land swap on Hartford Road, but what another student suggested is that there is some kind of ramshackle industrial buildings that Morgan could maybe take those over, and they could serve as a gateway to the campus and connect it to Bel Air Road. Something else I think is that Morgan has something called the Morgan Community Mile, which is supposed to be Morgan's connection with the whole community. But they're the funding right now for the director position, and Morgan is not funding it. And there's no director. So, Morgan doesn't, and I really think that, Morgan doesn't honestly and part of this I think is that Morgan's just history as more of a technical school. But Morgan is really not interacting that much with the surrounding community. I mean, they have a proposal to put a wall around the campus. I think that it's really up to faculty, quite frankly, and students to really push the university to just engage with the community. Oh, and one other thing, Morgan is a member of the Live Near Your Work program, but they're not really promoting it.
the what?
The Live Near Your Work, where they give
Oh.
bonuses to where they give cash incentives for university employees, because given they're especially Chum, which is given the level of vacancy, I think that there would be a lot of benefit here. But the university, I don't feel like they're not promoting it the way Hopkins and such is, and I think that's really important.
Well, maybe if they can come on board, they can do it in a kind of, I don't want to say inclusive, like they're being exclusive, but a kind of with a much broader range of stakeholders than initially happened in EBDI. But I do agree with you that the program has gotten better, and Hopkins seems to have learned a little bit along the way. The vision was so large. I mean, it was this preposterously large project from the beginning, and
Well, the reality is also that
yeah,
it didn't happen the way they wanted.
No, it didn't.
So it's not a giant biotech
Yeah.
offshoot
No,
of with all these innovation companies that come out of
yeah,
Hopkins. It's more like just an expansion of the space needs that they had.
yeah, right. Are there other comments or questions from the
I just
audience?
wanted to connect to what you were saying about, putting barriers around universities. And I'm curious, because there's so much happening. I live right near the Homewood campus, and there's so much happening with the police force that, they've convinced the legislature to allow them to hire. And I was struck also in one of your slides, one of the articles about Drexel's Innovation District called it an enclave. And I was just really struck by that, that use of language and this are we really trying to connect with the community, or are we just trying to, create more amenities and wall people out? So I was just curious, in your research in Philly, what did you learn about policing and security and barriers?
Yeah, those are good questions. I referenced in that slide that had all the different borders and barriers, and you had the promise zone and the federal opportunity zone and everything. You also have the University City District, which is a kind of special purpose district that Penn and Drexel and a couple of other area institutions have all kind of bought into, and they have their own sort of security force, and they do sort of clean and safe stuff, and it is a way of kind of demarcating territory that is sort of okay to be around, to be in around the campus. So it's not walls. It's more it's sort of using actually sort of urban design features to sort of demarcate areas that are sort of okay to go areas, in near the campuses, but that University City District boundary stops at Spring Garden Avenue, which is the lower southern border of that neighborhood, Mantua, that I was talking about, and that is very symbolic. Those people know that they're not in the University City District, which in some ways means that the policing isn't quite happening there, but also they're not having the investments. So it's a whole thing of I think. I think that really it's in the next few years as the investment starts to, the investment in the innovation districts, starts to really start to have spillover effects, and you do have more mixed, student housing in the kind of outlying areas. There are going to be some interesting conversations that are going to take place about security, and the University City District is, in certain ways, they also do a lot of community services. They have an award-winning skills training program called the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative that actually really tries to be, to help people from who are disconnected from the campuses to get into career ladder jobs on those campuses and things like that. So it's not all about keeping people away, but and again, I don't think there's physical barriers, but there are these kind of signs or symbols that show people who belongs here and who doesn't belong here, and that's just. You can take universities to task for that, but on the other hand, that's just kind of a symptom of the deep economic inequality, racialized economic inequality that just pulses through every aspect of urban life. And you can't necessarily blame the universities for sort of doing what they do in the context of that. That's an interesting. But Hopkins is more about. I don't know much about Hopkins in there.
We can talk more about it.
Okay.
It's ugly, we'll say that. Their armed police force that is going to be able to roam past the boundaries of the university is troubling.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's give another hand for Dr. Robert Powers. Thank you again for showing up.
No online questions?
Is there any? No, we're live streaming, but we're not on Zoom. We're on YouTube. Okay. Thanks to our tech crew here.
Yay, tech crew.
All semester long, making sure these things are part of our record. And if you're interested, I'm sure we can talk to Laura for a couple more minutes. You can also buy her book.
I have
It'd be very useful for
a fly.